Imagine a country sitting on the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, a treasure chest buried deep in its soil, a geological lottery ticket worth trillions of dollars. Picture a nation so astonishingly rich that in the middle of the 20th century, it wasn't just prosperous. It was a global magnet for talent, a shining beacon of possibility. By 1950, while much of the developed world was still recovering from war, Venezuela had achieved the fourth highest GDP per capita on the entire planet. It was twice as wealthy as Chile, 4 times richer than a recovering Japan, and an almost unbelievable 12 times richer than China. This wasn't a country people fled from. It was a country people fled to. Engineers from Europe, entrepreneurs from the Middle East, and laborers from neighboring countries all flocked to its shores, hoping to claim a small piece of its staggering, seemingly endless prosperity. They came for the highest wages in Latin America and a quality of life that was the envy of the continent. Now, let your mind race forward to today. That very same country, the one with more oil than Saudi Arabia, has to import gasoline because its own refineries lie silent and crumbling. The money was more valuable as a raw material than it was as a medium of exchange. This was the shocking fate of Venezuela, a country whose fortune once rivaled the world's great dynasties. But this isn't simply a story about politics. Though politics plays its part, it's an economic autopsy, a financial investigation into a spectacular death. How does a billionaire nation go completely broke? To truly understand this epic collapse, we have to go back to the source of that immense wealth. Venezuela's story of incredible wealth starts, as so many do, with a monumental discovery. In the early 20th century, Venezuela was a quiet agricultural society known mostly for exporting coffee and cocoa. But deep beneath that soil, something far more valuable was waiting. When the first major commercial oil well was successfully drilled in 1917, it was like striking a match in a room saturated with gas. The boom that followed was not gradual. It was instant, deafening, and utterly transformative. By 1929, in just over a decade, Venezuela had rocketed to become the world's second largest oil producer, trailing only the United States. By the 1930s, oil wasn't just part of the economy. It was the economy, coming to account for over 90% of the country's total exports. This colossal flood of petrodollars made the Venezuelan bolivar a rock of stability in a volatile region. The nation was no longer just a country. It had become a petrostate, an empire built not on armies but on an endless ocean of black gold. This transformation accelerated into overdrive in the decades following World War II. From the 1950s to the early 1980s, Venezuela experienced a period of incredible growth that was the envy of the world. Its capital, Caracas, blossomed into a dazzling cosmopolitan metropolis of daring modern architecture. It became a vibrant cultural hub, a beacon for immigrants from war-torn Europe and poorer Latin American countries, all drawn by the promise of high-paying jobs and a standard of living unmatched on the continent. For Venezuela, it was like winning the lottery every single day. The president at the time, Carlos Andrés Pérez, spoke of La Gran Venezuela, the Great Venezuela, a grand vision funded by what seemed to be an infinite river of oil money. The country embarked on an epic spending spree, funding massive social programs, food subsidies, and futuristic infrastructure projects like new steel mills and hydroelectric dams. It was during this heady time that Venezuela earned the nickname Saudi Venezuela, a nod to the mind-boggling scale of its wealth. Then, on January 1, 1976, the government nationalized its entire oil industry, consolidating it into a single state-owned behemoth, Petroles de Venezuela, S.A. or PDVSA. This was a moment of immense national pride, the culmination of a national dream to control its own destiny. And for a while, it worked spectacularly. PDVSA wasn't run like a sluggish government ministry. It was structured as a commercial company designed to compete globally, inheriting the operational standards of the foreign firms it absorbed. Staffed by world-class engineers and managers, it was efficient, profitable, and deeply respected, eventually growing into the largest company in Latin America. From the outside, the billionaire nation looked invincible. It had the biggest proven oil reserves on the planet, a world-class company pumping out millions of barrels a day, and a population enjoying the highest standard of living in the region. The problem wasn't the money itself. The problem was what the money had replaced. It's like a giant tree that grows so large its shadow prevents anything else from growing beneath it. For Venezuela, that resource was oil. The unending flood of petrodollars made the bolivar an incredibly strong currency. While that sounds wonderful, it had a corrosive side effect. A strong bolivar made everything else Venezuela produced, its coffee, its cocoa, its textiles, its manufactured goods, far too expensive for the world market. At the same time, that mighty bolivar made imports dirt cheap. Why bother making clothes, assembling cars, or even growing food when you could just import better, cheaper versions using oil money? So, slowly but surely, other parts of the Venezuelan economy began to wither. Fertile farms that once produced coffee and cocoa were abandoned as agriculture's share of the economy shrank. Local factories, unable to compete with cheap imports, shuttered their gates, causing the entire manufacturing sector to decline. The country gradually stopped being a place that made things and transformed into a place that just extracted one thing to buy everything else. The entire national economy was dangerously simplified into a three-step process: pump oil, sell oil, import what you need. This created an illusion of wealth, but it was a fragile, hollow wealth, lashed to the unpredictable price of a single commodity. The second flaw was in the nation's mindset. The gusher of oil money created a culture of spending, not earning. When a government can fund itself by collecting oil checks from a state company, it has less incentive to nurture a complex private sector that pays taxes. It doesn't rely on its own citizens for revenue. Economists call this a rentier state, a dangerous model where the government's relationship with its people changes. The political system becomes focused on fighting over how to divide up the pie, rather than working together to make the pie bigger. Even during the high-flying 70s, the warning signs were flashing. The government, drunk on cash from the oil shock, didn't just spend what it earned. It began borrowing colossal sums, mortgaging its future on the assumption of ever higher oil prices. Between 1972 and 1982, Venezuela's external debt exploded from a manageable $2 billion to a staggering $33 billion. The country was acting like a lottery winner who, not content with their jackpot, also takes out massive loans, sure that the next win is just around the corner. Then, in the mid-1980s, the party came to a screeching halt. A global oil glut caused prices to collapse. For a nation that had built its entire existence around high oil prices, the shock was seismic. Suddenly, the government was saddled with crippling debts and earning only a fraction of its expected income. The illusion of infinite money was shattered. The bolivar was massively devalued in an event that became known to all Venezuelans as Viennese Negro or Black Friday. For a population accustomed to a strong currency and cheap imports, it was a profound psychological and economic trauma, the end of an era of seemingly guaranteed prosperity. This crisis exposed the deep rot. Decades of easy money had created a system where political connections were more important than competence. Corruption began to spread like some credible accounts. A staggering $100 billion was siphoned away through graft and mismanagement between the 70s and 90s. Instead of being reinvested, a fortune that could have secured the dynasty for a century vanished into foreign bank accounts. Even the crown jewel, PDVSA, was being quietly weakened as political pressure grew and contracts were increasingly awarded based on loyalty, not merit. The 80s and 90s became a lost era of deepening crisis. The country lurched from one emergency to the next. By 1998, the purchasing power of the average Venezuelan was just a third of what it had been at its peak. This was the desperate scene for the election of Hugo Chavez, who promised a Bolivarian revolution. And as luck would have it, oil prices began to soar again, handing him a tidal wave of cash. For a moment, it seemed the good times might be back. But the fatal flaws in the empire's design were never fixed, and now they were about to be triggered with catastrophic force. Before the final unraveling, the billionaire nation was on its knees. It had survived the first major shock, but its economic immune system was compromised. Its debts were huge, and its foundations were hollow. The stage was now set for the final act of this tragedy. What came next wasn't just a mistake, it was a deliberate act of economic self-destruction that would make the collapse irreversible. The final act of Venezuela's economic tragedy began with a single catastrophic decision, following a bitter national strike in 2002 and 2003, where opponents sought to paralyze the oil industry to force him from power. The Chavez government, in an act of political retribution, summarily fired more than 18,000 employees of the state oil company, PDVSA, nearly half its workforce. This was not just a layoff, it was a purge. Appearing on television, blowing a whistle, Chavez called the company's management offside and declared them fired, their names later published in newspapers. It was a deliberate hollowing out of the company's brain. The people fired were the company's core technical experts, the seasoned geologists who found the oil, the brilliant engineers who designed the refineries, the experienced managers who ran the industry. They were the institutional memory, the human hardware that made the machine function. They were replaced by thousands of political loyalists, many with no experience in the oil sector. Expertise was replaced with allegiance. This was the precise moment the engine of the billionaire country was deliberately broken. From this point forward, the collapse was no longer a risk. It was a high-tech business like oil. Expertise and maintenance are everything. The new management stopped doing crucial preventative maintenance. Billions of dollars that should have gone to reinvestment were diverted to political result. Pipelines, refineries and drilling rigs started to rust, break down and fall apart. The result was as predictable as it was swift. Venezuela's oil production, the lifeblood of the nation, went into a nosedive. From a peak of over 3 million barrels per day, output began a relentless slide, eventually collapsing to a fraction of its former glory. The country with the world's biggest oil reserves could no longer get that oil out of the ground. The source of over 95% of the nation's foreign income was drying up, not because the oil was gone, but because the human capacity to extract it had been willfully destroyed. With its primary engine stalled, the country's fragile economy began to self-destruct in a devastating chain reaction. With oil money disappearing, the state turned to the printing press. The central bank, now controlled by the government, started printing bolivars with reckless abandon. This is the classic recipe for hyperinflation. More money chases fewer goods, so prices explode. By 2016, inflation was 800%. By 2018, the annual inflation rate reached an almost unimaginable peak, officially cited at over 130,000%. Prices were doubling every few weeks. Life became a daily struggle for survival, with many people eating only one meal a day. The bolivar became so worthless that the government was forced to repeatedly chop zeros off the currency. A staggering 14 zeros were eventually removed, just to make basic transactions possible. As the country fell apart, anyone with the means to leave was a mass exodus of the middle class. Doctors, teachers, mechanics, engineers, including thousands of the fired PDVSA experts who were quickly hired by oil companies abroad. This hemorrhage of human capital accelerated the economic freefall. Between 2013 and 2021, the entire economy shrank by roughly 3/4, an implosion of a scale rarely seen in a country not at war. In a misguided attempt to stop prices from rising, the government imposed strict price controls on everything from beef to toilet paper. But this just made things worse. If a business is forced to sell a product for less than it costs to make it, the business simply stopped selling it. To enforce this, the government began expropriating private companies, from small farms to large factories, placing them under state control. The result was a death spiral. Production collapsed, store shelves went empty, and crippling shortages of food and medicine became a nationwide crisis. At the same time, rigid currency controls made it impossible for remaining businesses to import raw materials. This toxic combination systematically dismantled what was left of Venezuela's productive economy. Finally came the debt default. That mountain of public debt from the 70s became an unpayable burden. With no oil money coming in, the government couldn't pay its November 2017. Venezuela officially defaulted on its massive foreign debt. This cut the country off from all international financial markets, making any recovery impossible. The billionaire country was now officially and completely bankrupt. The aftermath of this total collapse is a human tragedy on a staggering scale. The exodus of more than 7.7 million people represents nearly a quarter of Venezuela's entire population. A demographic catastrophe. Millions became known as caminantes, or the walkers, trekking hundreds or thousands of miles across South America on foot, fleeing a country where they could no longer survive. Inside the country, the healthcare system is in ruins, with hospitals lacking basic medicines, running water, and reliable electricity. Malnutrition is widespread. The electrical grid is so neglected that massive blackouts paralyzed the nation for days. At a 2021 unbacked study estimated that an astonishing 95% of the population was plunged into poverty, with more than 3/4 of them in extreme poverty, unable to afford basic food. The rich social fabric of a once proud nation has been torn to shreds. So how does something this catastrophic happen? If we distill this tragic story to its essence, what is the ultimate lesson? The first lesson is that human inheritance is not the same as real wealth. Venezuela had the oil, the raw physical asset, but true national wealth comes from the ability to turn that asset into value, and the discipline to manage the profits. Countries like Norway also have vast oil reserves, but they treated their oil money like a one-time gift to be invested for the future, building a diverse non-oil economy. Venezuela treated it like a permanent salary to be spent immediately. The second and perhaps most vital lesson is that the people who build a fortune are more valuable than the fortune itself. The single most destructive decision in this saga was the 2003 purge of PDVSA, after they fired their experts. They still had the oil, but they had destroyed the brains needed to make it work. A nation's real enduring wealth is the collective knowledge and skill of its people. When you drive out your experts and entrepreneurs, you perform a national lobotomy. And the third, most crucial lesson is that strong institutions are the invisible operating system of a prosperous society. This is the true heart of the story. Venezuela's collapse is fundamentally a story of institutional decay. It began with the erosion of financial discipline in the 1970s, accelerated with the loss of an independent central bank, and climaxed with the destruction of property rights and the rule of law. Strong institutions are the foundation upon which all else is built. Without them, no amount of resource wealth can save you. It's like a great family dynasty that goes broke. The heirs inherit the fortune, but not the wisdom, discipline, or work ethic that built it. They were given the wealth, but forgot the principles that created it. Today, Venezuela is still sitting on an estimated 300 billion barrels of oil, a treasure still worth many trillions of dollars. But the country remains fundamentally broken. The geological gift is still there, but the nation that was built on top of it is gone. The story of Venezuela is a brutal, sobering, cautionary tale for the 21st, shows that a country can possess all the valuable resources in the world and still end up ruined. It proves, in the most painful way imaginable, that what makes a nation rich isn't what's buried in its ground, but the strength, integrity, and resilience of the institutions it builds above it. Venezuela didn't lose its wealth, wasn't stolen in a single heist. It was dismantled, piece by painful piece, from the inside out. Stories like this reveal the powerful, often invisible forces that shape our world. If you want to keep exploring them with us, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. Thanks for watching.